Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
You know all about my next guest. He's somebody I'm very fond of, and I think he's doing incredibly great work to raise the alarm about the geoengineering agenda on this planet. What's really special about him is that, like myself, but in his case much more than me, he's got a mainstream background. He's worked in the corporate world. You know, he used to work for Bechtel Power. He was a contractor working in California and Arizona. But because of personal circumstances, because of what he began to see in his own in his own homestead and in his own town, he had the courage to start speaking out about geoengineering. His website is a must look and it's a must watch, and I keep it handy and I read it all the time. It's geoengineeringwatch.org. That's geoengineeringwatch.org. Daily, terrifically researched and terrifically written articles about this agenda and more besides. Geoengineeringwatch.org. Let's welcome back to the programme our friend Dane Wigington. Dane, welcome back.
Thank you, Richie. Thanks for your continued courage in speaking out as well. No matter how much research we do, we wouldn't have a voice without someone like yourself, so it's a team effort.
Well, it is, but we have the easier job. We get to go home at the end of the day and not really worry too much. Guys like you take massive risks and you never complain about it. And I've never heard you adopt a kind of a victim complex and talk about they're after me and all of that. You've never done that, but the fact is they are. You know, guys like you are certainly on a watch list, and you know, the least we can do is present programmes, try and make them interesting enough to get people listening, and then get guys like you on, Dane. So thanks for the kind words, my friend, but you're the one doing the work. As always, brilliant articles this week. Terrific article about ecocide, and I want to read something from the article before we talk about the engineering of the weather and about the droughts that continue to blight California and elsewhere. Something about an article on your site today written by one of your contributors, but you put a foreword to it, and it was depressing, but it was so true. I'm going to read what you wrote, my friend. It was, Dane wrote, destroying the natural world in the relentless pursuit of power and profit is business as usual for the global elite. The military-industrial complex, the energy industry and the climate engineers all are a part of the same malignant cancer that is controlling the world and killing our host, planet Earth. The dark and destructive agendas could never have been put into motion without the order followers that are so prevalent in the ranks of the human race. All those that are just doing their jobs without any moral consideration whatsoever. Powerful stuff, Dane, right? But depressing, because there's such truth in that. How many men and women go to work in companies like Monsanto and others that we could name here, companies maybe like Bechtel, companies like Nestle, and maybe do know what those companies really represent and stand for, but they put their heads down and carry on for a paycheck. Are we being too hard on them in expecting them to, you know, to flee the corridors of these horrible institutions and join us? Or are we right to say, no, you've got to do more than you're doing?
You're exactly right to say that everyone needs to do more than they're doing. I want to make this clear. If we stay on the current path, it leads to certain near-term total global extinction. That's a mathematical certainty. We've lost 60% of Earth's wildlife populations in the last 40 years. 60%. The die-off rates right now are cataclysmic. It's an unimaginably accelerated mass extinction right now. So here's my point. With those who think that they're saving anything by biting their lip, hiding in the corner, cowering in their cabin on the deck of on the Titanic, of which we're all on, it's not going to save you. We have one chance to change course, and we have to do it soon or it won't matter. And this is where, again, paychecks, pensions, personal pursuit of pleasure, whatever it is people are doing with their time, their energies, their efforts, it's not going to matter soon. And if they truly love their children, Richie, if they truly claim to care, then they need to show it by taking action now. We don't have much time. We truly don't have much time. The climate system is coming apart. Climate engineering is fueling that process. I'm not saying it's the only factor at all. We've been very bad stewards of our planet. But climate engineering, mathematically, again, I want to use that term because this is not an opinion. It's not a hypothesis. Mathematically speaking, climate engineering, the greatest and most immediate threat we face short of nuclear cataclysm. This is the issue we must deal with now.
I can't add to that. You're absolutely right to say that. And, our listeners listen to this. By the way, if you got a comment you want to make to Dane, it's at Richie Allen Show. It's Richie at richieallen.co.uk. You're right, the time to act is now. The time to pretend that those things in the sky are normal and they're contrails. And even though you know deep down that it's not true, deep down, it's time to stand up and start asking questions. You might be interested to know, Dane, that the brother of the British politician Jeremy Corbyn, who is the leader of the Labour Party, his brother Piers Corbyn was on the show recently to talk about CO2 and how he doesn't believe that CO2 is driving climate. I agree with that. But what was amazing, Dane, was he spoke eloquently about geoengineering. And here's the system guy, a meteorologist, and he's actually telling the truth about spraying. He's saying, yes, it is going on. That's incredible. That's positive, that.
We need that. In regard to CO2, it's important people consider other aspects as well. For example, the ocean acidification right now. That's a major issue. Oceans acidifying at blinding speed. Oceans are dying at blinding speed. And again, much of the causal factor behind that is climate engineering, but not only climate engineering. Obviously, we have Fukushima. Again, we have the acidification of the ocean, but it's important people consider the complexity of the situation. I'm not sure if your meteorologist associate talked about methane, which is filling the atmosphere right now. Climate engineering is making that worse, not better. We have also the massive methane leaks occurring because of the wells around the planet. In the East Laptev Sea of the Arctic, you have an extreme methane blowout happening right now. In addition to Siberia, Richie, have you seen the big crater-like blowout holes in Siberia from the methane expelling from the permafrost?
Yeah, through your website. And by the way, folks, go to geoengineeringwatch.org because you'll find all the information that Dane is talking about there. Yeah, so it's staggering, yeah.
Well, the only point I'm trying to make is that, again, it's a complex scenario. The sources of damage to the planet are complex. But again, the single greatest causal factor right now that's disrupting the planet's life support systems, without question, mathematically, is climate engineering. And this is why this issue is so imperative that we face it. And for people to understand, they're not helpless, as they've convinced themselves of or have been told, that if all of us effectively and efficiently woke others up around us, this is simply the only way forward, Richie, that we must reach critical mass so that those in the military, those participating, their families and so forth, understand that they are quite literally killing themselves along with the rest of us. And we have to reach critical mass to do this, because even though we have legal efforts going, Richie, I'm not sure if you saw, we've now, our attorney's team has now filed in Canada. That lawsuit is actually filed as of March 9th. We're getting close to filing in the U.S. We have a team of 8 U.S. attorneys. And even though we're taking these actions, people can't sit down on the bench and think someone else is moving the ball forward, because the main point of these legal actions is, again, to reach critical mass of awareness. So all of us are needed. No one can be spared from this battle. No one can sit down on the bench. Everyone needs to learn how to effectively share this subject, pass on credible information, help us to sound the alarm.
You're absolutely right. And one of the things that we can't do in the independent media is get into ridiculous squabbling and fighting. I mean, I'll have listeners now who will say, Richie, you don't believe that the man's industrial activity is driving climate. And I don't believe that. I've never seen any evidence to it. But I do believe that other activity by man, as described by you over the last few years, is destroying the planet. I'm absolutely convinced of it. And, guys like you and others have convinced me of it because of your research. And people shouldn't, lose sight of that. And they shouldn't fall into the trap of arguing and fighting about, CO2 and all that. Yes, there is an agenda. There's another agenda, a very sinister agenda, to make us believe that our CO2 emissions are driving climate change. And, that's all about an Orwellian, Machiavellian, intrusion and incursion into our everyday lives. But it doesn't change the fact that the planet, as Dane said, is being systematically poisoned and destroyed. I've been asked to put to you, my friend, a question that I dread to hear the answer. I dread to hear the answer. How bad, in terms of the death of life in our oceans, how bad are we at the moment?
It's far worse than bad. We're heading for Canfield Ocean, which means a dead, lifeless, superheated, stratified, oxygenless ocean. We're very close to that. And what I want to stress for all your listeners, Richie, is that I don't want them to believe me. I want them to investigate, and I want them to consider this, to not to look at a headline and form an opinion off of that because it's what we want to believe. And in a nutshell, I want your listeners, I hope, will consider this. Any form of human activity that affects the natural environment should be considered geoengineering, because the atmosphere doesn't know whether a particle came from a smokestack or the back of a jet. It doesn't know the difference. So again, when we eliminate, for example, 55% of Earth's trees, 55%, 3.4 trillion of Earth's trees are now dead since the start of modern civilization. So that's a massive impact to the planet, massive. And that must be considered a form of, quote, geoengineering as well. Now, this doesn't take my focus off of geoengineering itself, but in the course of, as you said, uniting the tribes, which is what I'm trying to do, to unite the tribes, it's important that for all those in the environmental community and the environmental organizations, which have been incredibly, incredibly apathetic on this issue, I mean, criminally so, Greenpeace, Sierra Club, I mean, these organizations are simply denying climate engineering, which is the epitome of hypocrisy, because they want to protect their 501c3s and all the global warming people like Bill McGibbon and so forth, denying climate engineering, the single greatest climate disrupting factor of all. They're denying it. How do you talk about the climate without talking about this issue first? You can't. But I want to stress, though, again, if we're going to build bridges with people like those groups to say, yes, we understand that the planet is damaged, certainly the planet, there's no denying the warming. I mean, at this point right now, there's absolutely no denying that. If you look at frontline data, not to believe me, not to believe any other person from any other source, look at frontline data. So that being said, shouldn't we all focus on the single greatest climate disrupting factor of all, which is climate engineering, but also to recognize that it's not the only source of damage. You can't cut down the forest, you can't poison the oceans, you can't pave the planet without having an effect also. So it's just important we realize the equation is not a this or a that. It's a this and a that and a lot of other things as well.
No, you're right, but we can't, at the same time, I totally agree with that, but at the same time, we can't ignore certain historical facts. And I'm quoting from people like Professor Ian Plimer, people like Piers Corbyn and others. Not many of them get access to the mainstream media but geologists, as you know, have used dating technologies to show us that our temperatures, particularly in my part of the world, particularly in the north of England, used to be a great deal warmer than they are now. I mean, going way back to
how far back were you talking about? Though?
We're talking back. We're talking before the Dark Ages. We had temperatures in this country that were so warm that we could grow grapes here. Grapes were grown in Yorkshire. These are kind of historical facts. So I always, I'm not being the devil's advocate here. I looked at all that data. I looked at the fact that before the last ice age, there was far more CO2 in the atmosphere than there is now. You and I are in absolute agreement on 99% of everything. I think you're an absolute hero, my friend. But I can't stand by and accept that CO2 is driving warming or climate. It isn't. There's no historical evidence to say that it is. There's no evidence today to say that it is, in my opinion.
Richie, on the CO2, has it been higher? Yes. I'm very familiar with paleo data. The Pliocene epoch, 5.2 million years ago, CO2 content was perhaps 25% higher than today. But sea levels were 100 feet higher. So again, and the planet has been warmer in the past, yes, but it took much, much longer to reach those warm periods. The planet right now is warming 50 times, and this is not a figure off the top of my head. This is statistical research data, and any of your listeners can look at this. It's warming 50 times faster than it should coming out of an ice age. So again, geoengineering, the cutting down of the forests, the poisoning of the oceans. I mean, all these things have an effect. They can't not have an effect. So all I'm getting at is I want to stick to the focusing on climate engineering, certainly. But what I'm saying, if we deny that human activity has hurt the planet in any other way, I think that we have no chance of ever building a bridge with the climate science community, who needs to find their courage, needs to find their backbone to face this issue. If we deny all these other forms of human damage to the planet, then I think we're finding ourselves in a category like those who deny climate engineering, and I don't think we should be.
And I appreciate that, but the last thing I'll say on this, and then you can say, you can finish up on this, and then we'll move on, because there's some terrific questions coming in on Twitter. The last thing I'll say on this is that there is a flip side to that. You know, guys like me and others who have looked at the claims made by the Al Gores of this world and found them completely disproven by, you know, credible scientists and geologists who said, no, this isn't happening. We could also say, well, there's a flip side to that point that, we should accept this and we should accept that. I would say, well, no, I can absolutely accept that your research into geoengineering, what it's doing to the planet, is absolutely right on and it's an absolute fact. But I can't accept, because I've never seen any evidence to support it, that man's activities, and I'm not talking about governments now or the hidden hand or the cabal, those behind the gun. I'm not talking about those, but I'm talking about, industrial man's activities. I've never seen any credible evidence to say that that's affected the planet. Of course it pollutes rivers. Of course it causes deforestation. But does it irreversibly affect the climate? I would say no. But we shouldn't get bogged down in that. I'll give you the last word on that. And just on the ice age thing, yes, we are, but we're in a warming period now. We're still coming out of the last ice age. And we've had a lot of temperature variations and variables, haven't we, over the last 150 years? We've had warming and cooling periods over the decades, over the last 200 years as well. I'll give you the last word on that, and then we'll get to the serious stuff. And, well, it's all serious. And I'll ask you loads of questions on Twitter. Go ahead.
First, in regard to Al Gore, is he a criminal? Yes. Is he a part of the cabal? Yes. Are carbon credits a sham? Yes. I agree with all that. But in regards to Gore's science data on the climate, this is what I will say. Was his data wrong? Yes. But in the opposite direction of what most people choose to believe. It's far, far worse than anything Gore disclosed. And if you may not have seen, Richie, I posted an article about 7 days ago. Half of the Great Barrier Reef is expected to die in the next 30 days. Half. Why? Because the water is so unimaginably warm. It's literally killing the reef in the geologic blink of an eye. So again, these are headlines I said would be coming. I've tenaciously held to the fact that the climate is absolutely warming at blinding speed, and the climate engineering is making it worse, not better. And this is where people think that if you acknowledge that the climate is warming, you must be for geoengineering. That couldn't be further from the truth. What I'm trying to do is to make people understand that, yes, the climate is warming at breakneck speed. There's a lot of sources of damage, geoengineering being at the top of the list, but geoengineering is, again, making it far worse, not better. And if people understand that geoengineering is a, quote, cure that's far worse than the disease itself, it's killing everything, they can never be sold geoengineering by the power structure. They can never buy it or believe in it or accept it. And that's why it's so important for people to understand that geoengineering is making a very bad situation exponentially worse, not better.
Brilliant stuff. 28 minutes past the hour. Dane Wigington, we can always disagree. That's the beauty of real independent media. We can disagree on points, but ultimately we will chat. We will see your eyes and we will realise the truth. We always will. Loads of questions for Dane.
Richie, the only thing I would ask people to do, again, I don't want them to believe me. I simply ask that they would wipe their preconceptions clean, look at frontline data, frontline film footage of what's happening around the globe. Forest fires, we're seeing 600-700% of the normal forest fires burning. We're seeing formerly frozen methane release and migrate to the sea surface and then to the atmosphere. And so I'm just asking people to wipe off their preconceptions and ideologies and look at the frontline data, and that's the best way they'll get a true compass setting.
Absolutely. I mean, you know where I'm coming from ultimately, because you and I have spoken before. You know, and I don't think you agree with me, and I totally respect it. Again, we're not your standard independent radio show that interviews people whom they always agree with and doesn't want to find out anything. We're different. And
we agree we should focus on stopping climate engineering.
Absolutely right. And that's what I'm coming to now. But what I was going to say was, you do know is that I believe, because I've said this to you before, and I know you disagree with this, and I respect your disagreeing with it. I believe that everything you've described is right, but it's a willful destruction program. This is willful. This isn't the result of malevolence and the result of capitalists who are too greedy and it's all about money. This is willful destruction of the planet. It's something that, divides opinion amongst my friends, the people I work with on this program and elsewhere. It's something David has written about in books for years. I never believed it. I didn't want to believe it. But I believe everything you've ever written about. All these horrible things you've just described. You're absolutely right, they're going on. I believe it's a deliberate program. You don't.
Well, no. In regards to geoengineering, I'm not denying the malevolence at all. I mean, but it's important even with that for people to understand that those involved with these programs, military personnel and so forth, are being told what they're doing is something for the common good, to save the planet, which couldn't be further from the truth. And that's why we need to reach critical mass, again, so that we can stop these programs from the inside out. All I'm saying is when it comes to industrialized activity, and I know a lot about this in regards to forests because I live in one, I've done many programs involving government scientists, and for example, with logging here, the clear cutting and the practices that happen, cutting down the forests, which produce oxygen, which help produce rainfall, it's happening on a mind-numbing scale. And what the logging companies will do is actually spike with spikes that kill the tree, all the non-timber trees, so they can virtually eliminate any biodiversity in the forest. And they then plant back a monoculture, genetically modified tree. And I'm saying this kind of mentality of doing anything we want to the planet, dumping nuclear waste in the oceans, again, the burning down of forests, Siberia is losing 100 million acres a year, that all of these factors affect the climate. Just the forest fires alone, for example, regardless of, and geoengineering, let's lead this right back to geoengineering, Richie. How is geoengineering causing the forest fires, fueling that? Single greatest factor in the forest fires burning down around the globe is geoengineering.
Yeah.
Single greatest factor. Because of the drought, which you mentioned, because of the toxic rain, you have bioavailable metals in the rain killing the root system. We have a destroyed ozone layer because of geoengineering. We have more lightning because of geoengineering and the ionization of the atmosphere. We have incendiary materials settling on the branches. The worst from every direction leading back to geoengineering. And once those forests burn down, the dark soot settles on the ice around the globe, making the ice dark, making the ice absorb more heat from a shredded ozone layer that's now allowing more heat to penetrate. And that starts a feedback loop. And that feedback loop feeds on itself. And as the oceans warm, methane thaws and releases, goes into the atmosphere, covering the planet like a layer of gas, more heating, more fires, more burning. Everything starts to feed on itself. So it's important for people to understand statistically right now, if we stay on this path, Richie, it's going to be the end of the road very soon. That's why the single greatest leap we could take in the right dimension or the right direction, again, is to expose and stop climate engineering.
Absolutely. We're going to talk about how we're going to do that, by the way. Just to clarify what I was saying, maybe I didn't, I know I didn't because I can beat around the bush sometimes. Everything you described about these military personnel and the compartmentalization, I agree with every word of it. You're absolutely right. What I really do believe, though, is that the people behind that, the people whom ultimately dish out the orders, those people want to destroy the planet. Now, that's where I think historically, and we've spoken a dozen times over the years, you and I think that's historically where we've parted company. But you know what I was just thinking there, Dane? It doesn't really matter, whether you think I'm a crazy conspiracy theorist because I believe that there's an agenda to destroy the planet, or whether I think that Dane is wrong about the reasons for it. That really doesn't matter, because everything you're saying about the methodology of what they're doing is absolutely right, and that must be stopped, regardless of whether I'm right, and that it's a sinister agenda to, ultimately wipe half the population of the earth off the earth, which I believe, or more, as in that. Whether I'm right or not really doesn't matter, because it's happening.
That point, we don't disagree on that. I'm not at all denying that, Richie. Just so you know, I think we're on very much the same page in regard to those at the top and their willingness to do anything, regardless of the consequences to the planet or the population, to carry out their agenda, no regard for the consequences. And do I think that they an objective would be to reduce global populations. Do I agree with you? Absolutely agree with you. There's no question about that. So I think we agree on a great many points, my friend.
We absolutely do. Loads of tweets, by the way. Go to geoengineeringwatch.org. I'm telling you, folks, educate yourselves. It's a fantastic website, and you can subscribe there to newsletters. There's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of articles. They're absolutely brilliant. Dane, let's get into a few quick questions, my friend, because our time will run out quickly. And thanks again for coming on today. I know you get a million requests like this every week. Eduardo says, is it true that termites generate more carbon than humans? This is something Piers Corbyn said when he was on the programme. They do generate a lot of carbon, don't they, termites?
They do, but again, the same rumor is about volcanic activity. The volcanic activity is producing more CO2 than humans. The actual statistics show clearly that anthropogenic activity right now is producing 150 times more than all the volcanic activity on the planet. And that's saying a lot because volcanic activity is very prevalent right now. So again, if not for geoengineering, what would happen with the extra CO2? The forest would start to thrive. The hydrological cycle, the rain cycle, would kick up, not be reduced. So the earth would respond. It would try to absorb this extra carbon. We would have lush forests instead of forests that are burning to the ground. So again, there's a lot of variables in this equation, but from any direction, from every direction, climate engineering is stopping the planet from responding, completely decimating the web of life. So this is back to our focus of stopping climate engineering. I think we should keep our focus there.
Let's keep our focus on that. And that brings us to a question from Lucy. Lucy has emailed in this question. She says, I came to climate engineering through Dane's website. I watched documentaries made by Michael Murphy and others. She says, I'm convinced it's happening. How do I explain to people what's going on? Dane, you know, if I'm interviewing you in the next 5 years, every time I interview you, and we don't have an interview, we have a conversation, right? We're going to get that question from listeners. When I first started saying that this agenda was happening, my friends, some of them deserted me. One of them actually wrote to me in genuine concern, suggesting that they come and see me and they get me some help. They thought I'd, swallowed the blue pill or the green pill and I lost my bloody mind. We can't get people in our communities to take this seriously, even though we know that everything you've said about these technologies that they use, the agendas, how they do it, it's right. How do we persuade people to just take a look at it?
The single most impactful step you can take, show them a video, and we have some unbelievably compelling video of these tankers spraying at altitude, turning on and off. Now, if people don't believe what they see with their own eyes, and we have up-close photographs of the nozzles mounted on the pylons directly above the engine exhaust stream to make this look like condensation. If they don't believe film footage of a tanker spraying at altitude, KC-10s, KC-135, C-17s, then they won't believe anything you show them. Why? Because you are threatening their perception of reality. And they can only break that down themselves from the inside. So what I would argue is show them a film like that, 2-minute film, and pass on some credible data and then move on. And Richie, as far as mental health goes, some of the top psychoanalysts in the world, like Scott Peck, have stated emphatically, because the research backs this up, the hallmark of a healthy mind is an unyielding willingness to face the truth, no matter how dire or how threatening. And so you are in the category of a healthy mind, Richie, and so are those who recognize this issue. It's those who don't recognize it and who deny it who need the help.
I was thinking while listening to you there, you could almost go insane with it, with the malevolence of it, with the hatefulness of it. When you realise that it's happening, it could drive you absolutely crazy. And I've been asked to ask you about the situation in California. Last time you were on, you and I had a good old rant about the perversion of Nestle buying millions of gallons of water from Californian aquifers for nothing, for next to nothing, while there's a drought in that state and while people are being told to be scarce or to be spare with your water. Explain to our listeners who don't know how they go about engineering these droughts. How do they manage that?
On a warming planet, and the planet is absolutely warming, you must have more rain, not less. The laws of physics make that clear. How can we have less? Because the atmosphere is filled with light scattering particulates that are desiccants, which means they absorb atmospheric moisture. They disrupt the hydrological cycle, the rain cycle, because they block light photons, which create evaporation. They slow overall wind. They stop convection. So this is the wrench in the works. You have the same with volcanoes. Richie, in 1992, when Mount Pinatubo blew, the particles put in the atmosphere from that volcano made that year the lowest rainfall year ever recorded on the planet by 50%. Particles in the atmosphere absolutely destroy the hydrological cycle. So when they saturate the atmosphere with these particulates, they can migrate the rain right over one area and drop it on another area. They reduce the evaporation, so you have less moisture in the atmosphere as a whole. And this is absolutely conclusive, peer-reviewed science study from too many sources to count. So again, the drought situation, the protracted global droughts, is not a result of climate change. It's a result of geoengineering, period. In the case of the drought, that is very, very cut and dried. That can be attributed to geoengineering.
It's sickening, Dane. It's sickening to me. You know, I was thinking of you yesterday, today as well. I think of you a lot, my friend, because I read Geo-Engineering Watch all the time. But I was thinking of you today. Irish journalist was on Sky News today, Enda Brady, and he was talking about a scandalous story. Now, this doesn't concern you at all, but a flu vaccine that was given to the elderly and those who have, problems with respiration last year didn't work because the vaccine, the flu had, what's the word? It had morphed. They don't say morphed. They use another word, don't they? It had evolved or whatever. Anyway, so a lot of people died that shouldn't have died. In the middle of the report, Dane, in the middle of the report, Brady, the Irish reporter, said, and of course there are other figures that showed that a lot of people are dying of dementia. And then he moved on. Nothing was said about that. Now, our listeners, all the time, whenever I speak to you or to Michael Murphy or when David is on the programme, they say to me, isn't the massive increase in diagnoses of dementia and Alzheimer's, isn't this absolute proof of the scale of the spraying that's gone over our heads?
It is absolute proof. And if you might have seen some recent headlines trying to attribute declining health to climate change, again, another lie. That when we're talking about the declining health, mathematically speaking, nothing compares to the all-out assault from climate engineering, which is poisoning the entire planet, every breath we take. And yet we have a mainstream media. And I would encourage your listeners to focus on mainstream media and the cowards and criminal tyrants that occupy mainstream media. Focus on them. Publish their emails, those who deny the climate engineering issue. Publish their emails, send them data, CC as many credible people as you can on that message so we can start to expose the media that's hiding the climate engineering elephant in the room by their constant disinformation. Just like, again, this article that claims it's climate change that's causing health to decline. It's climate engineering that has the effect on the ecosystem to the degree we're discussing. So again, there can be no credible discussion about the climate without discussing climate engineering first, and so many roads of total decimation lead right back to that core, Richie.
Now, Dane, all the information is on geoengineeringwatch.org, but give our listeners a flavour of some of the companies, Dane, that have been used to further this agenda technologically. Give us an idea.
Let's examine first who does all the modeling. All the modeling for the National Weather Service and NOAA is done by Raytheon, defense contractor that's up to their neck in geoengineering. All the modeling done for the FAA, all the weather modeling done by Lockheed Martin. And now people ask, why wouldn't anybody speak out in these programs? Why don't we hear from whistleblowers? One, the Obama administration has prosecuted more whistleblowers than all of the administrations combined. What happened to John Kiriakou, the only whistleblower on the torture issue? He's the only one who went to jail. So again, for people to understand all the companies involved with this, I mean, the list is mind-boggling, Richie, but to get at the core of this issue, we have to expose those who are putting out the disinformation and hiding the reality. And again, that's meteorologists, we have reporters and so forth, and it's up to all of us cumulatively in our area to work together to expose these people that are lying and helping to hide this issue. So
yeah, you must. By the way, you of course feel free to tell me to mind my own business, but I'll connect you with Piers Corbyn. Piers is talking about geoengineering, and at great risk to, I suppose, his own reputation and certainly his the reputation of his brother. But there's a really good feature there. Two very good minds. There might be one or two things that you might disagree on, but fundamentally, both of you accept there is a program. I want to get through a couple more questions. We've got another 5-6 minutes with Dane, and we'll have to unfortunately leave it there. But it's massive on Twitter. Redistribution, all one word. Squeeze the words together. Search Twitter, and you will see what other people are saying. Alex says, I totally agree. We live in a headline world. If somebody reads the headline, they take it as gospel. That's true. Sean McDonald says, Richie, ask Dane about HARP being replaced with off-planet Star Wars technology. Now, I did read a lot of articles by reputable independent media creators in the last few years who talked about HARP being replaced with off-planet technology. What about that, Dane? Any ideas?
I haven't seen any data to corroborate that, and I'm not saying it's not happening, but I'm saying this, that the radio frequency signature that we see on aerosolized cloud cover is still very much locally based. When we can see the ripple effect, if you will, on clouds like undulatus apparatus, when we can see those effects from radio frequency transmissions in a great many locations around the globe, Richie, we know that's a localized source. So, and HARP is still online, by the way. In fact, when the first headlines came out about HARP being shut down and so forth, we did not take the that. And we held to the position that there was no indication HARP would be shut down. In fact, it wasn't shut down. It's still not shut down. It's still funded. So again, whatever other aspects there may be in the equation, we very much see identifiable local sources for the ionosphere heaters, the RF transmitters, the NextRad towers, which we see scattered all over America and other countries, and we can see the effect of those transmissions on precipitation maps. So very much localized RF frequency sources all over the globe, still going on.
Loads of tweets. Paul says, the planet's been here a long time. The Earth is fine. It's the people that are screwed or are, he says another word. But the thing is, these geoengineering programs, Paul, they are genuinely destroying the planet. There's no doubt about that. I used to think that we weren't capable of destroying the planet, but I don't believe that anymore. Deb is in New Zealand, as is Zana. Deb says, given the complexities and the range of what humans can now do, why would geoengineering be a stretch too far? That's a brilliant point, Deb. And it's something people should say to people, when they say, oh, this is ridiculous. Tell them, well, look, we can send people to the space station. We can do all these things. Of course, we can manipulate the weather and the climate if we want. Millie says, plant the trees and spread the seeds. That's a really optimistic and a really uplifting thing to say, Millie. Absolutely right. Plant trees, 100%. Dane, just before we have to wrap it up, a number of people have, and genuinely a number of people have asked me to ask you, I know you're going to give a positive answer, but they're saying, are we doomed? Are we doomed? Are we condemned to see the slipping away of this planet because of the crazy geoengineering climate change programs?
From all perspectives, if we stay on this course, the answer is mathematically yes, with total certainty. Therefore, we must change course completely and immediately. And this will take all of us, and the greatest leap we could take in that direction is to expose and stop climate engineering. So I would argue we should focus on that goal first. And when you're climbing a mountain, you can't necessarily figure out from the bottom all the different difficult spots you'll have on the way up, but you need to deal with what's in front of you first. And climate engineering is absolutely the first and foremost priority we should all focus on. So the planet we have known is damaged very severely, and climate engineering, again, at the top of the list of damage, not the only cause, but at the top of the list. If we all focus on that, Richie, that would be the greatest leap we could take in the right direction. So I would argue that instead of being mentally shut down by considering how bad it may get if we don't change course, let's focus on what we need to do to actually change course. Share credible data with people, start spot fires of awareness, help us to reach critical mass, and we can take a quantum leap in the right direction, period.
And direct people to geoengineeringwatch.org. and to all the articles, the videos, and all the photographs there, because it is deadly, folks, and it is vital, and it's why we return to it so often on this program. Dane, thanks for your time. You have a lot of work to do there in California with that drought and all the problems there. I appreciate it. I appreciate what you do. Thank God there are people like you doing it. Look after yourself, my friend, and come back again and talk to us real soon. My
pleasure, Richie. Thank you for all you do for the common good.
Not at all. Dane Wigington on the line to us there from California. Love Dane. Check out geoengineeringwatch.org. That's his website. It's 9.5 minutes to the top of the hour. So yeah, I mean, we can disagree. You know, I obviously fundamentally disagree about CO2 driving climate on the planet. It isn't. It hasn't ever done, and it never will do. But that doesn't mean that, nearly everything that Dane is saying is right. It sounds very arrogant of me, doesn't it, to say that, oh, I'm right and I know more than Dane. No, I should be honest and say I have read much of the climate change, the man-made climate change data that Dane has read over the years, and I conclude that CO2 isn't driving climate change, and that those who are destroying the planet and who are affecting the weather want us to believe that man's activities are driving climate change, but they want us to believe that for another agenda. But the agenda links up with the destruction of the planet agenda, because the CO2 driving climate change agenda that they want us to believe ultimately results in mass surveillance and intrusion into your homes, a whole list of things that you can't do. You can't grow your own food. You can't do this, you can't do that, you can't drive that. It's ultimately about depopulation. And both of these, concepts meet in the middle anyway. Dane Wigington is brilliant, he's a genius. And I recommend you check out geoengineeringwatch.org. We're not mutually incompatible, these ideas.